All right. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm really excited to be with you all today. I'm Dr. Morgan Crossman, and I'm the Executive Director at Building Bright Futures. I hope what you're seeing on your screen is a beautiful little baby and the entryway to the Bbf Data and Evaluation Committee. Can I have a quick, yes, that's what we're seeing. Beautiful. So we're really excited to see folks today. I think one of the most exciting components of today's meeting is that we are bringing together cross-sector partners to have really exciting conversations around a data development agenda for Vermont's early childhood system. So today, during the meeting, you'll hear about the current responsibilities and opportunities for this Data and Evaluation Committee. And quick plug, if anybody has a better name than the Data and Evaluation Committee, that is not something we're tied to. And as we've reset a range of our different strategic planning committees, really want it to be a powerful name that lets folks know exactly what this group is doing. So if you have thoughts there, we are open to it. So during today's meeting, again, we'll start with thinking through a data development agenda and subcommittee priorities. We will talk about supporting alignment and integration through data in our early childhood system. But the most important piece is that this meeting and this group of stakeholders who's coming together is building the cross-sector relationships, the collaboration and communication on early childhood data. It's the first step in building a culture of how we prioritize high quality early childhood data in the state of Vermont. It's about building cross-sector commitment to early childhood data priorities and really thinking strategically about how we move that work forward. And probably more importantly, it's ensuring that our state is actually using high quality evidence and data to inform decision-making in the early childhood arena. So what we've really looked to do is bring together public, private, and research partners that can collectively support a data development agenda and set the direction for early childhood priorities in the state of Vermont. So for those of you who know my background, this is what I live for. I am so excited to be in this virtual room, and this is why I wanted to come back to the state of Vermont to be really focused on how we better support our early childhood system. And as I mentioned at the beginning of the call, before we started recording, there is a ton of national energy dedicated right now to early childhood data and data integration. So today, at the end of the call, I'll be jumping off to give a presentation to the national audience under the preschool development grant to describe the work that Vermont has done under the early childhood needs assessment in developing our strategic plan, and then developing Vermont's Early Childhood Resource Data and Policy Center as a way to centralize early childhood data, publications, and initiatives. So for those of you who are not traditionally around Building Bright Futures tables, as a state in 2020, we updated our early childhood strategic plan. It's called the Vermont Early Childhood Action Plan. So what you're seeing on the left-hand side of the screen are the 4 goals identified as how we are moving towards the vision for supporting kids and families in the state of Vermont. There are 4 goals aligned with different layers of this ecological model that you're seeing on the right, where at all times we are focused on how we are supporting the well-being of each and every child in the state of Vermont. Today's meeting is really focused on goal 4, and the strategic planning committee that is here is the the Data and Evaluation Committee, and it's really focused on the early childhood system being an integrated, well-resourced, and data-informed system. So as we're thinking about what it actually means to have an integrated, well-resourced, and data-informed system, we've outlined some of those things through the strategic plan and want to make sure that everybody has at the very least seen this language, but would also really advise you to go take a look at the full VCAP so you can get a really strong sense of all of the different indicators that are identified there and how we talk about this work. At the integration level, we're talking about collaborative leadership. We're talking about how we are coordinating and communicating these efforts. And on the data front, specifically in thinking about integration, it's how we're building a truly integrated early childhood data system and thinking about what that means and how to move towards that for the state of Vermont. In terms of being well-resourced, we're really talking about how we ensure that the chronic underfunding we see across our early childhood system is attended to, and that we really think about the value of investing in children in this early childhood system and monitoring how we are supporting them through all of the different resources and investments. And we have other committees really dedicated towards this well-resourced topic area. The final piece of this is data informed. So again, this committee really supporting Vermont in making sure that we as a state are committed to using evidence and data to inform decision-making, which involves a range of things, not all listed here, but listed here, collecting and reporting high quality data, really trying to understand the impact of our system of services and supports, equitable access, and measuring the extent to which we are doing a good job in supporting kids and families in the state. And as we think about the role of this specific committee, and for those of you who have been a part of this committee far before I came to Building Bright Futures, what we've realized is we have a really big opportunity to do this work incredibly well together. And that we wanted to reset this committee in a really powerful way that, again, brings together the public, the private, the research partners to do this work well together. So this committee is really charged with prioritizing the vision for and progress towards data integration, creating and monitoring a data development agenda and the priorities for Vermont's early childhood system. And when I say early childhood, I'm talking about the prenatal period through age 8, serving as an accountability mechanism to monitor progress towards the 4 goals of the VCAP, and serving as a primary advisor for research, data, and evaluation efforts across the state. BBF's role in this work is being that convener, right? So our responsibility is to bring together all of these different data stewards, agency leaders, content and evaluation experts to talk about the strategy and the challenges, the capacity and infrastructure in place or what's needed, and to, again, be that consistent voice of using evidence and data to inform policy in Vermont's early childhood system. So I want to take 1 minute and have everybody who's in the virtual room, instead of doing introductions, which will take 30 minutes, what I'd like to have you do is everybody write your name, your role, and your agency, organization, or entity that you're coming from today, so that people have a sense of who's in our virtual room today. In addition to that, you should have seen in the priorities document that we sent out to folks the full list of who we really prioritized in terms of attending this meeting. So thank you for writing in the chat. And as everybody is doing their virtual introductions, I am going to pull up the formal priorities in charge for the committee. The other thing I want to draw folks' attention to is, as you are watching folks introduce themselves in the chat, it's an opportunity for you all to make connections that you might not have and identify who is not at the table that needs to be in terms of setting data priorities for our early childhood system. All right, I'm going to go back to the screen share and walk folks through the big picture priorities for what this group is going to tackle. And before anyone panics too much, we're setting the vision for this committee for 5 years, not this year, not this month, not this year. We're talking about a big picture vision for how we're moving towards this work and towards the ultimate vision for Vermont's early childhood system. So this work plan is, again, it's an important vision to hold, and my job is to push you towards that vision and to hold that vision. Your job is to push back and say, this is what's possible this year. This is what we can do in terms of our infrastructure and capacity, and this is what we need in order to build that capacity. So what I'm going to start with is priority 1. And for those of you who have not yet seen this, I am going to do it a little bit more detailed than I typically would. And for those of you who have read through this document and have already memorized it, I appreciate it, and bear with me. So priority 1 is to put together an early childhood data development agenda. And what's exciting is that under the 2020 Early Childhood Needs Assessment, we put together an 8-page data gaps table that set the tone for some of this, right? What we knew about Vermont's early childhood system is that there are so many questions that we can't answer. And it's not because we're not collecting a lot of data. We are. It just doesn't always answer the right question, or, what's collected is aligning really strategically with federal priorities and what we're required to report versus the data we really need to be able to make a really strong decision for how to support kids and families. So we have a baseline, and we asked you all before coming into this room, and don't panic because I'm going to give you another opportunity to do it, but we've asked you, what are those priorities? What are the things that you personally care about? What does your organization, your entity, your agency care about? What are the top data priorities? So part of what we're going to do today is document some of those unique priorities by sector. And we've put together an idea board to start capturing that information as a starting point. But again, we're going to keep moving that forward over the course of the next year so that by the end of this year, we have a really strong data development agenda. We know what our priorities are, both individually and collectively, and we understand our capacity to move that work forward and where we need to write grants or build capacity to move some of that forward. The other exciting piece about some of this data development agenda is thinking about what resources are in place, both in terms of infrastructure, but also staff capacity. So as we're thinking about those two things, I invite you to be very transparent about what we know about our infrastructure and capacity right now to move the work forward. Because this is an exciting time where we're also bringing our research partners from, our different academic institutions, I'm thinking about our think tanks and other research partners to the table to help support building that capacity across a range of infrastructure. Another component of this is finding out what additional resources are needed. So if what we know is we actually don't have the right, for example, technological infrastructure in place that's needed, what is it? And what resources need to be allocated, and the same thing on staffing capacity. And that is not just specific to our private partners or our public partners, but across the board, what do we need to actually do this work well? And then as we're thinking about roles and responsibilities, because we have such a strong group of partners in the room, who needs to take the lead? Who's the most appropriate entity to look at a data gap? So for example, if it's that data is not yet collected, who has the capacity to be able to do that? Whose responsibility is it? And how would we think about putting together that plan? If it's data analysis, who has the skills, expertise, and capacity? And the same thing as we look at compiling and summarizing some of this data. So we've listed out a range of questions here for the things we should be considering as we're moving forward with the data development agenda. The next piece of this data development agenda is, again, looking at the actual technological infrastructure in place and what's needed to move the work forward. So these are not, this section specifically is not an exhaustive list of everything that exists, but for those of you who are coming from one sector or another, wanting you to know what is there. So the state longitudinal data system that is overseen by the Agency of Education, formerly the Bright Futures Information System, which is in transformation right now to become the CDD information system. The Vermont Early Childhood Resource Data and Policy Center, which is the centralized data platform that Building Bright Futures oversees. And then the other is the Universal Developmental Screening Registry. And I'm noting my challenge with spelling on that one. So I apologize, Brina and others from MCH. But what we want to do is have that be a more formal repository of what infrastructure we have and talk about how we're integrating and aligning that work. And tied with this kind of third and final step of this data development agenda is really thinking about data integration in the state of Vermont. What you're seeing on the left-hand side, this visual, it is intentionally small because I don't want you to focus on it, but I also want you to know that it exists, which is this idea of a vision for an early childhood integrated data system that includes, public education, the ability to link from pre-K to the K-12 system, Head Start and early Head Start, home visiting, Part C in Children's Integrated Services, Part B, Part C being early intervention, Part C being early intervention, Part B being special education services, childcare, and really having this group think critically about how we go from our siloed data collection systems and monitoring systems to thinking about how we integrate at the highest level. And this is something that has started long before my time through the state longitudinal data system, but thinking about the future. What are the different components of data that need to be publicly accessible and merged into a centralized repository so that we can actually answer questions and monitor our strategic plan? VermontKidsData.org, which is the center that I just mentioned before, is the first prototype or step in making that data happen and making that repository in that centralized place a reality. But it's just that, it's a prototype. And now we need to build on that to truly have this integrated data system. I'm going to pause and pull down my screen share and see if folks have any questions about priority 1 before I move to 2 and 3. Any thoughts? Anything really exciting?
It's exciting to hear that it's a five-year vision. I think. Thinking of the work, it's a fairly aggressive agenda, but I think that knowing that that's potential to a marathon and not a sprint is somewhat soothing.
Thank you, DJ. Can you quickly introduce yourself? Because I think that a lot of partners have not yet met you.
Yes, I'm off mute. Yes, hi, DJ Deniston, and I'm with Child Development Division. I'm the new Data and Information Administrator there, overseeing the Data and Communications Unit. So I am fairly new to all this, so bear with me, but happy to be here.
Thrilled to have you here. Hi, Brina.
Hi, Morgan. Thanks for the shout out about MCH. I see that some of my old health department colleagues are on. I am no longer at MCH, as you know, but I love the identity. And I just wanted to clarify for folks, the Universal Developmental Screening Registry is part of a child health profile at the health department. So it was built as a sort of tabs for pediatricians and other child health professionals. So it's the immunization registry, the newborn screening results, including hearing, the lead results of preventive lead screening, and also developmental screening. So it's exciting to think about that. At the same time, we're honing in on child development, obviously, as a team.
Thank you. Any other final comments or exciting features of priority 1? All right, on to 2, even though 1 would be enough for 5 years. Priority 2 is about monitoring our strategic plan. So what you heard me mention at the beginning of this call is that for the first time in our strategic planning history, not only do we have goals identified in the vision and strategic plan, objectives and strategies, but we have outcomes and we have indicators. And the way that those were identified were by reviewing all of the different strategic plans currently in place in state government dedicated to kids and families, and pulling from that to build the first round of the repository for how we're monitoring that strategic plan. But we've built a dashboard for folks to be able to look at that in a centralized place. And that is what I'm excited to present about to our national partners at 3 o'clock. But what's interesting about where we are with this VCAP dashboard is that there's still a lot of data missing. So some group, not everybody on this call, but as we talk about subcommittees, will be tasked with looking at that data and seeing, what is missing from that dashboard. As we're thinking about services, process, the impact that we have on children and families. What are the big picture indicators that we should be measuring that we aren't? What are the indicators that we've identified but actually can't measure yet? So I'm thinking specifically about goal 4 and how are we actually measuring whether or not we have an integrated early childhood system, things like that, right? So that's a really exciting body of work where we'll be having a subcommittee talk through what indicators still needed to be developed, who has access to that data, how to make sure we have a very streamlined, easy process for getting that data in. And then from a big picture standpoint on the strategic plan, how are we measuring the big vision? So if we have 4 goals in any given year, how do we measure if we're making progress toward the big goal and the big vision, or each independent goal, versus monitoring the indicators and outcomes and really being thoughtful about that process? And then, one of the final components of priority 2 is the development of what we're calling early childhood grand rounds. So for those of you who have any type of medical or a pediatric health background, you've seen pediatric grand rounds or cardiology grand rounds where on a monthly basis or a quarterly, which is what I'm proposing, I don't want to get out over my skis here, bringing together data and early childhood experts, both within the state of Vermont, but also nationally, to talk about the most critical indicators for kids and families, to dive in on one specific topic and talk about what it actually means in research and in practice, and how to actually map those two. So looking for groups who really want to take the lead on identifying those speakers, identifying national partners who can come in and talk about where Vermont's situated in comparison, or in alignment with what is happening on the national stage and national best practices. And then another piece of that is really about how we as a committee are able to communicate out to the rest of the field and other stakeholders about progress and outcomes. So I'm going to pause my screen share one more time and open the floor for any questions, excitement, comments. One of the things that I didn't mention is that a lot of these priorities or projects or components of the priorities are things that have been on the agenda for quite some time, and we haven't been able to nail down. We haven't quite gotten to, or we didn't have the right people at the table to move them forward. We also didn't necessarily have funding to do some of these things before. And what's exciting is that we actually have some federal funding right now, but also on the potential horizon to continue moving this work forward. So I think what I want this group to really be thinking is big picture vision. What would be the ideal way that we're moving these things forward? How are we really setting the tone for early childhood priorities? And how are we moving our state forward in terms of actually being able to monitor our programs and know whether or not they are making an impact, and consistently using that data to inform decision making? All right, last screen share, and then I'll pause again. So the third and final priority is serving as the primary advisory body for data initiatives in the early childhood arena. And the reason this is important is because over the last 2 years, at least that I have been in this role, I've seen so many different groups and subgroups have to be stood up as advisory bodies on data initiatives to support different small studies that are moving work forward. And this group now has the collective expertise to serve in that capacity, right? This group includes researchers and evaluators and folks who are either collecting the data or the primary person monitoring data for our system. You have some collective expertise that I think is really important in supporting others who are either about to start a new venture and collect data, or they're writing a grant. And it's not to say that this group has to, and definitely not this full group, but even the subcommittee would need to be actively involved in all steps of that process, but really that people could come to this group and say, hey, I'm about to start a project and I'd love to come and present my idea for 10 minutes. And to be able to give that very concrete, evidence-based methodological feedback and thinking about how we can provide support to folks who are thinking about doing data collection or initiatives for early childhood. Questions or thoughts about that section? The integration of data section and the data development agenda is by far the most sexy. I agree with you. So I'm glad to hear that everybody's on the same page with those priorities. And I think as we move into the next section and talk about, not just the data priorities, but what subcommittees are needed, it'll be really important for you to say, here's where my skills and expertise would be best used, and here are things that I think are missing. So I do want to pause and now ask the question to you all. We have 3 very big priorities. And again, we're talking about a 5-year plan. So every time we update the strategic plan, we should be updating our work plan as a committee, and every year tackling specific components of it. And right now we're trying to decide what are those components for this year. But my question is, if you're looking at this 5-year plan, what's missing? Is there some critical component of this, especially folks that have been around this data and evaluation table in the past? What might be missing from this plan?
This is Wendy Geller. So I think that's something that we need to spend at least, from my perspective, 30% of our collective effort on. And I say 30% because I feel like it doesn't scare people as much as 50% will scare people. But I really think that we need to pay attention to the very beginning of the data lifecycle. I think that folks get very excited about the idea of complex analyses or, long-term longitudinal research projects, et cetera, but none of those efforts are really going to come to profound fruition if we don't attend to what it takes to build a culture of data quality at the very beginning. So what do I mean by that? Things that I mean by that are training the folks on the ground who are the practitioners who are entering data to report to state bodies around what's happening in the practice. If we don't have good data quality from the outset, our analyses are fundamentally hampered. So I think from my perspective, I would like to see a commitment to doing the hard and careful work with people first on the ground, to instill and encourage and support them in beginning to understand why data are important, so that we can improve our quality from the outset.
Thank you, Wendy. And I'm going to throw a term out that may or may not be the right one, but something that I do think is absolutely missing from this table is data literacy, which is in my mind how you just described, making sure that people understand this culture of high quality data. What does it mean, and why are you collecting this data? And that it's not just for federal reporting and you're reporting to the state, right? That we are actually talking about being able to support quality improvement within our programs and moving toward how we best serve kids and families. Is that the right term, Wendy, or would you continue to call it building that kind of high quality data culture, which we talked a little bit about in the beginning, but is not in this table right now?
I think as long as we're definitive about data literacy really being about the entire data lifecycle. Sometimes I'm a little skittish about using the term data literacy because I think that folks automatically leap to places like how you use analysis. I think that folks leap to assuming that data literacy is about how you read tables or how you, statistical thinking from like a consumption standpoint, like you're consuming data to learn something on the analytic end of things. But what I mean by this is taking care of data, taking care of records so that our quality are high enough that they can be turned into useful information.
I agree, Wendy. I think it also relates to kind of like a data infrastructure as well in terms of like out on the ground, because I think part of that culture is also shifting how people think about the fact that they're already collecting a lot of this data, but they aren't necessarily reporting it up, right? But they are using, so what is the infrastructure that we can support as a state for folks to use, like Bright Wheels and those types of things that both make it easier for programs to collect information, and thinking specifically about early childhood programs, ed programs, but to collect that information, and then also for their own purposes, for whatever they have to do, rather than having it on paper, but then could also then make it much easier for the state to have that data in one repository. So I think that those two things kind of go hand in hand a little bit.
Awesome. Thank you, Claire and Wendy. And really quickly, because we do have new folks in the room, can you just quickly identify who you work for and what your role is?
Yeah. So I'm Claire Waterman, and you may have heard me as Claire Irwin for years, but I work for Education Development Center. I lead the Universal Pre-K Research Partnership through the Regional Educational Lab, Northeast and Islands, and I also am a liaison for another contract that EDC is a subcontract to another organization for. So I'm kind of around. I do live in Vermont, even though I know oftentimes researchers from these organizations do not. So
thank you. And Wendy, if you still are on, thank you.
Yep. So I'm Wendy Geller. I am the division director for AOE's Data Management and Analysis Division.
Awesome. Thank you. So great feedback, and we can absolutely add that into the bigger picture priorities and work plan as we move forward. Anything else that folks are seeing that you'd be really excited to see in this 5-year work plan? Awesome. That is fantastic. It did take a while to build this work plan based on everything we've heard from early childhood data stakeholders in the last 2 years. So it is a little validating to hear that folks understand where we are and how we're moving forward. So I would love to turn this over to Dora Levinson, who is Building Bright Futures Research and Data Director, to be talking about our data priorities and what we've all collected now, or what we've built as this very first pass at a repository from you all.
Thanks, Morgan, and thank you all for being here. I'm really excited to have everybody here in the virtual room, and also there are people who can't join us but who have sent information or are excited about continuing to be part of maybe some of these subcommittees. It's really exciting that this is coming together. As Morgan said, let's move into some of the data priorities. A few of you were able to send in some of the 3 data priorities for your agency or organization or sector, and thank you for doing that. I know a lot of you have probably thought a little bit about this, and we have started an idea board to be able to collect some of this. And Morgan just put it in the chat. So we've put in what we've received, but this is going to be open through next week so that we can continue to gather these priorities. And obviously at the end of next week isn't like this isn't the only time that we'll be collecting priorities, but this is really to inform our data development agenda, Vermont's early childhood data development agenda. We are the experts coming together to be able to really move this work forward and to have some power behind it as the experts, and as a collective. Some of you sent in specific indicators and data that needs to be developed. There were others that talked about infrastructure and integration. So take 2 minutes and just look at what is here. And if you feel like adding something, definitely go for it. I'm going to ask that you not use the like function, but that you add your name and organization at the bottom, just so that we can track who is excited about these things, where they're priorities, and we can also be able to follow up And again, this is going to be open for another 2 weeks, another week, and we will. But let's just take a few minutes to read. Does everybody have access to this?
For anybody who potentially has not used idea boards, just a quick note, if you want to be adding an entire sticky note, you can click the plus button and it will create a new one. If you want to add to what's already there, you can click in, and I would just ask that you stick with the convention that we have, which is just having your own space and a dash and then adding to the different components.
Sorry, can I just ask a clarifying question to make sure I'm doing it right? So if we can add stuff, but then also if it's something, rather than liking something, if it's something we think is important, to just put our name and our organization in there. Okay, just wanted to double check. Cool.
Yes, and the reason that we're saying it's great that people can like it to show that excitement. The challenge is we want to know who wants to be working on some of these things. What do you care about as an entity, as an individual, that you would want to be prioritizing, and building that thoughtfully together. And just a reminder that this is not the current comprehensive list, right? This is just what folks sent pre-meeting. We still have to now integrate this list with the data gaps table, and then build out the agenda, and then prioritize based on what everybody on this call finds most critical and important as collective priorities, in addition to the individual.
So as folks are looking over and potentially adding things, I wonder if anyone wants to share, what are you most excited about that's on here? Or is there something that you submitted and you want to expand on? I am really excited about a lot of things here, but want to hear from you. Or potentially not.
Hi, it's Heather Madison. For anybody who hasn't met me, which I feel like I've met almost everybody on this call, I am currently the Senior Process and Performance Analyst for the Child Development Division. And of course, when I clicked on that, my thing went away. Hang on, because I was going to say the thing I was excited about. I think the one that and I haven't made it through all of them to read them, to be perfectly honest, but it is very exciting for the AHS and AOE to reinstitute a global MOE, so that we can really measure some of the things that are really in the indicators and data category that has been sometimes a barrier, along with previous conversations we had, to make sure we're all collecting enough data so that we can share and measure things correctly. So.
Thank you, Heather. I just want to do a quick shout out to our agency data stewards, who and I apologize for embarrassing you all now publicly, but I have never seen a group of partners across agencies come together in the way that you all have this year to be talking about early childhood data priorities, to be thinking critically about unique identifiers and data sharing, and really be trying to move forward with linking data. So congratulations and thank you for all the hard work that your teams are doing.
I also want to just say there is so much work that has gone on to make this meeting possible, to make this identification of cross-sector priorities come together. And that's a great example. And I know that that there are so many examples that have happened recently of people coming together and doing some really interesting and exciting work. And again, excited to be here all together, but again, getting to these places where we are hearing the same priorities from so many people, and let's leverage our resources and that collective voice in order to be able to move some of these things forward. Anyone else?
One of the things I will say that I am thrilled about is that when we asked a question about early childhood data priorities, not everybody thought, here's the data I want to see, the indicator. You all thought bigger, and I think that that is so important. Yes, there is indicator development that needs to happen. There's specific data that we as a state have some serious gaps in that we need to fill. And I'm glad that some of those are highlighted, but even bigger than that, it really is about infrastructure, how we're thinking about integration, how we're thinking about the collaboration, the partnership, and prioritizing this time, that I think is the most exciting to me, because I think that there are a lot of partners, as seen on the call, but even those not on the call today, who really care about this and want to move the work forward. And because that is exactly what I'm hearing on the national stage about data integration and early childhood systems integration, I'm really glad to see that that's where all of you are thinking as well.
So now I'd like to move us on a little bit. We can continue looking at this. And again, it's going to be open and it's a continuing conversation. We have a lot of integration to pull over the data gaps table, as Morgan was saying. But I want to talk a little bit about subcommittees and moving some of this specific work forward and the role of this larger committee. There are a lot of wonderful people on this call, and we do not expect everyone to be on every call because in order to value everyone's time and expertise, ideally this group will come together quarterly, and then in between there will be subcommittees that will meet monthly or bi-monthly to really do the work and move some of this forward. That this larger group is coming together, but that for these larger vision sessions, but the work is getting done in some of these smaller subcommittees. We've put together a few thoughts about subcommittees, and I will share them broadly, but we really want to hear from all of you about what are, if these are the right ones, are there ones that are missing? We've identified 5. Look at that. So the first is just around, is the agency data stewards coming together to really talk about that data governance and data sharing. VCAP monitoring. So again, Vermont's Early Childhood Action Plan. How are we making sure that we are making progress on this 5-year strategic plan? How specifically are we measuring each of our strategies, and how are we making sure that there's high quality data that's coming in, and that we're paying attention to it, and that policymakers and agency leaders and organizational leaders are really paying attention to this. We also have a study and grant development and review subcommittee that we came up with that we are thinking about. Again, the information is there. Really thinking about how we are identifying what the needs are, and then who can do it, and where the additional capacity is needed, and again, who can come together, who isn't necessarily of those who are not necessarily always at the table, leveraging all of those resources. The other is thinking about these early childhood grand rounds and data dissemination. So how are we showing Vermont as a leader? How are we comparing, bringing in experts from the national stage, and highlighting some of what's going on in Vermont? And the last would be some of these subcommittees that may need to adjust over time depending on the advisory committee that's needed for particular studies or grants, that sort of thing, but that the larger body can be pulled from in order to meet the needs of these ad hoc advisory committees. Any questions about those before we jump into potential additions? Okay. What's missing?
Let me ask it a different way. Are there any of those committees where you're like, man, there's no way in hell I'm joining that committee because I don't want to talk about that. I want to talk about this, right? What I really want to, what I want you to all realize is that BBF is here as a convener to be able to build the space for you to have the important conversations, the challenging discussions, and then to build capacity to move the work forward. So we don't want to create something that isn't helpful or meaningful. And we want you all as these data experts and research and evaluation experts to say, this is what would be the most helpful. We don't want to create a, subcommittee that no one wants to attend and that it really isn't powerful, right? We want to look at the priorities across this 5-year plan and say, this is what is needed. And this may not be the meeting that we can do that because we're still building out some of those priorities. We still need to do a ton of work on this data development agenda. So if you don't have feedback now, that's okay. But we want you to be thinking about that. What are the subgroups of partners that need to come together to have the conversation to move the work forward?
I just have a quick question on the study grant development and review committee. So I could see, or subcommittee, I can see, I'm just thinking of some of our division's priorities and needs, right? In getting review from state advisory council members or a subcommittee such as this. How would somebody, like that could be varied, right? I'm thinking of when we have to do a childcare market rate survey, those that are interested or would participate in that subcommittee would be different than maybe somebody that's saying, how are we studying pre-K and something like that? Or how are we studying immunization? Or, so I'm just curious how you're seeing that play out. Is like, it's kind of an overview, but there might be many committees underneath it, or, and how would people know about those opportunities?
That is the perfect question. So what we are thinking about in terms of a potential study or grant development committee would be that as a need arises, whoever brings that need. So Heather, I'm thinking about wage and fringe study or childcare market rate, right? For you all, you or whoever CDD's rep is would say, hey, we have this project coming up. Here's the initial plan. We'd like 10 minutes of this big committee's time to tell you about it. And then we'd make the ask, who would be willing to come to a small subgroup, right? This is not a standing subgroup where the same people are there over time. It's based on need and it comes in and out fluidly based on that need. Because you're right. The experts on pre-K may not be the experts on market rate, may not be the experts on children in protective custody, right? And it's also based on capacity, which is also why we can't have some of these subcommittees be these standing, this is the same person being asked the same task every single time. We want it to be meaningful. We want it to be fluid based on folks' skills and resources.
This is Wendy. So I think I would just throw on the table again, I really appreciate that you have data governance listed on this artifact. Something else that I think is important is professional development for folks on the ground, and maybe data quality is more of a technical term that doesn't speak to folks. So maybe it can be framed as like record keeping or something a little more accessible to non-technical folks, to practitioners. I think that there are some very lofty goals that folks have when it comes to really trying to ensure that the work in the early childhood space is informed from an empirical standpoint. But I think we also need to just recognize that the logistics of good data work rest in record keeping. So I wonder if there's some space there to head in the direction of like determining what kind of supports the folks who are practitioners on the ground need to enable, whether it's building skills or like Claire raised a great idea earlier about like what are the tool sets that are in situ on the ground, but what does it take to maintain obviously the required records, we got to do the required records piece, but the what's in it for me piece, right? But also the who told me I would need to do this, and then who provided me with the support so I could be successful in doing this from a practitioner standpoint. I mean, don't get me wrong, I always want all of the data, but we will not have what we need to do the ambitious analytic work that Vermont wants to do if we don't have really solid data management, data collection, data stewardship, data management, data reporting, record keeping.
Thank you, Wendy. I completely agree. And Claire, thank you for weighing in the chat as well. And Kate, I just want to reference that I am seeing everything you're adding into the chat, and we will make sure it's in idea boards too. Great conversation around what's missing. What else? And who needs to be in the room to have that discussion, right? Especially as I'm thinking about Wendy's comments about how we support, I'll use the broad term, the field, in collecting high quality data and what that means and why it's important. Who needs to be involved in that conversation that isn't at this table already? And what types of supports do we need to provide just to get them in that virtual room to be able to create the space to do that? Go ahead, Claire.
Well, now I have a response to your question. I mean, I'm thinking, you know, and I think this often happens with a lot of the work that we do is we often don't have the people on the ground in the conversations or represented. So that's probably, you know, and also thinking about families and how they might be valuable to be part of the conversation. And I don't know what that looks like. I think the other question I just had was, as it relates to kind of these subcommittees, are you envisioning that like each of like, that there might be a handful of us who each like take the lead on the committees, or is it the idea that you or Dora or someone else at BBF would be like the lead of the committee? I'm going to stop there. I'm just going to go around in circles. You know how I do.
Okay. Yeah. So I completely understood your question. And the hope would be that either Dora, Anna, or I would support either co-chairs or folks who are willing and have capacity to drive. But one of the things that we don't want to do is put all of the emphasis on prioritizing someone's time that may not have the capacity, or, you know, what we don't want is to burden anyone and adding additional work, right? So we are willing to provide some staffing support to make sure these projects and initiatives are moving forward, but we would love to have people who have the capacity, who are really interested in driving different components of this to lead and to be actively involved in the conversation and helping support scheduling and all of those things, because this, again, is not a BBF initiative. And I think that that's one thing that we've been trying to be really clear about, even as we talk big picture about Vermont's Early Childhood Action Plan and, you know, this data development agenda. It's not a BBF product. It may have BBF labels just as it has, you know, or logos, just like it has State of Vermont logos. But BBF's role is to support the conversation, to focus on integration and alignment across all of the different sectors. We want you to see these things as your collective work, just like the VCAP is our collective vision for the early childhood system. So yes, Claire, if you are offering to lead the things, thank you. And we will be tasking other people with leading the things if they're interested. Great question though. And I totally recognize people have to drop off. Thank you for being here.
Absolutely. Yes, thank you all for being here. And if you need to jump off, absolutely understand that. Going from meeting to meeting, I want to just expand a little bit. Again, this is about supporting the work that needs to happen. And many of you are working on some of these things already. So Wendy, you're talking, Wendy Geller, you're talking about this professional development and this initial step of the data cycle, right? And I know that some people on your team are also working on what this looks like. And so I would think about having, you know, someone from that team participate in a subcommittee about this, as well as some of the other partners on this call who are also working on that, or who might have, you know, if there are researchers who are working on how, you know, communications about this data quality, right? How are we doing all of those things and leveraging our time that we're already spending so that we're getting more done, and we're again just using our resources more effectively and efficiently. So on the topic of who is leading, I also want to say that we are, each VCAP committee is staffed by, is led by a public co-chair and a private co-chair. And we are looking for nominations of yourself or of other people to come after the meeting to myself or Morgan to identify a private co-chair and a public co-chair. And again, staffed by myself, by Morgan and Anna, providing that support. I know that has been lacking in the past, and really we are trying as an organization to step up and provide that administrative support for sure. And again, this is about moving all of our work forward. It's not about trying to put more work on anybody. So that's one of the things that we will be asking for as a follow-up step.
Dora, I also realized we didn't introduce Anna, and as we were thinking about introducing our team, so I apologize, folks, but Anna Burlett is our new policy and program director at Building Bright Futures, and she has already substantially increased our capacity to do all things data and policy. So thrilled to have Anna here. If you have not yet met her, she is in the Brady Bunch squares. Anna, if you want to say hi.
Hi, everyone. Great to see many new faces and many friendly faces. Glad to join.
So I'm going to move us on to some of our updates. Again, coming back to all of this will be open. Our idea board will be open. If it's easier, you can just email me. I will be sending out an email tomorrow with information about the recording and these requests. So if you want to just reply to that with your priorities, that if that's easier than the idea board, feel free to do that. And again, I'm going to say the asks and then I'll say them again at the end. The nomination for yourself or others as a private or public co-chair for the committee, if you've got a name for the committee. And then if you can take a look at our vermontkidsdata.org, which is about to be highlighted this afternoon and has been highlighted multiple times as a prototype, we would really appreciate that. And we do have a feedback form as well as a place for you to add resources or to submit resources so that we can make sure that this is a comprehensive list of publications and resources and all of that. I think those were the things. So now we can move on to updates, specifically upcoming data collection, upcoming reports, and any requests of each other. And I will be quiet.
I can go first, be the brave one. So the Child Development Division, these are the things off the top of my head. I'm sure we have other things going on, but we are going to do a data collection around co-payment if with childcare financial assistance, if providers charge the co-payment. That will be a required survey going forward at least once every 3 years. And we'll probably combine that somewhat with a cost survey so that we can have even more than what we did a couple years ago where we had a cost estimate. We'll actually have data from more than a few providers that can provide that information. The other piece that I was thinking that would be good to announce to this group is Child Trends, which is a national organization, was awarded a federal planning grant to work with the Child Development Division around childcare financial assistance, where for anyone who does not know, we are changing our program, changing the way we set what we pay providers and changing how we set our co-payment, what will be called family share. And we're going to enter planning around how can we measure if that change really has made a difference for families and for providers and their access. So we literally had our first meeting at the beginning of this week, but that is an 18-month planning grant that we just got. So we'll be entering into that as well.
Thank you, Heather.
I can jump in with just an update on something that we're doing through the Regional Educational Lab Northeastern Islands. And Heather, I don't know if you saw my, we got on one of those planning grants to work with the Connecticut Office of Early Childhood on the same planning grant. So I think we'll probably end up working together because they do it in a consortium framework. So that'll be really exciting. So through the REL, so just for folks who are not familiar with that terminology, the REL is the Regional Educational Lab, and Northeastern Islands is where Vermont sits. And we are tasked with supporting local and state education agencies and using data and research to inform their practice and policy. And so through that work, we have done a couple of reports and studies on universal pre-K implementation that most of you have probably seen, hopefully. And from that, this particular contract is wrapping up at the end of this year. And we are in the process of convening folks to discuss specifically as it relates to the work that we were doing, what data are missing, and what are some recommendations, and what are some progress that's been made as it relates to data on pre-K that are missing, that kind of limited what we could ask. There are other priority questions that AOE, CDD, BBF had brought to the table that we weren't able to actually ask as part of the work that we did with the REL. And so this will just be the form of a memo to kind of share internally, and then if, depending to the extent that folks want to share externally, they can. That will just kind of highlight specific to pre-K what those data elements are that are missing, and how they can be collected in the future. So stay tuned for that. We can keep you updated on that work.
Claire, I'm really excited to have you at this table for exactly that reason, especially as we're thinking about pre-K data, how it relates to childcare data, and in the context of this bigger data development agenda, taking those recommendations and then actually diving into what that means.
This is Wendy. Our fall collections are coming in. I have James Nadeau from one of my teams here. He leads the largest data collections here at AOE. So we'll have enrollment coming in on schedule. James, do you want to talk a little bit about the data quality processes that we've put in place in the last year or so to try to really speed up those feedback loops?
I guess. So we have some verification reports that we've created for folks that kind of outline any data outliers. So if they have like a significant change from last year's data, or if they have a change that is they have a standard deviation that is too large compared to the state norm, then we flag them and ask them to review their data and have a look at it. We also have data town hall meetings with these folks. We invite them in every 2 weeks to ask questions to us, and they'll get to listen in on each other's questions and learn things. And we've had a lot of success with improving submission outcomes due to those changes.
Thanks, James. I love the idea of data town halls. It's very interesting to think about, again, how are we supporting the field? How are we providing technical assistance? How are we making sure that they understand what's being asked and why? So that's awesome.
So for Let's Grow Kids, a quick update on a couple of researchy projects. We are just getting ready to start on the update of Stalled at the Start, which is, I believe, the 4th iteration of this, which is pretty exciting. And Katie Selena is here, and Jen Horowitz is also here, and they're the anyway, I was going to make some superhero reference, but I thought better of it. So they are definitely superheroes. And the other project that is just getting underway for us is we have just hired a consultant to work with us on sort of synthesizing all of the kind of workforce and economic related reports and findings that are out there, so that we can have sort of in one place what's the size of the childcare industry in Vermont, what's the effect that it has on like sort of the labor force participation and the like economy, what's the size of the workforce, and and how much do they get paid, and what is the sort of effect of childcare programs and early education in and of itself on the economy, as well as the sort of downstream effects of early education on children's future, right? Like, and the sort of economic effects of that. Anyway, so stay tuned for that. We're pretty excited, but we are scheduled the kickoff meeting yesterday. That's as far as we've gotten.
Thank you, Erin. I'm sure we'll be hearing more about all of those things.
Actually, if I could mention one more thing that we're trying to rally folks around. We haven't really figured out how we're going to do it, but we've been starting to talk to some people about conducting a needs assessment among BIPOC families around the state of what their sort of childcare experiences and needs are. And we haven't really figured out how we're going to do it, but that is like top of mind and the thing we're all talking about at the office right now. So if you have ideas, send them my way.
Thank you.
So I guess I can do an update. I don't know that DMH has new projects necessarily that are focused on data as much as we're really focused on looking at our data quality. DMH, we have for a long time relied on our MSR, our monthly service report data that comes in from the designated agencies on a monthly basis about all services provided. But what we've really been doing in the last 2 years is sort of focused on analyzing that data since payment reform and creating a data dashboard, and then really looking at sort of some of the oddities and upswings and downswings in the last year, and how much of, and starting to try and address the data quality of that, and how much of that is really changes due to what has happened in the last year, and how much of it is about reporting. And that, as everyone keeps identifying, that piece about data quality and reporting, which is an ongoing issue. And then we're also looking at, sadly, the increase in the need for higher levels of care for young children, and length of stay in crisis service, in crisis beds, bed capacity, length of stay for kids waiting in emergency departments. So that's new and not encouraging. And then really focusing on workforce data, which is a huge issue right now. So if I could ask one request though, when I unfortunately have a sick child at home, and I didn't write down the 4 groups that you wanted, and in order to sort of check back in our department about who, if there are other people who might also be interested in being a part of those. They're not in the PDF of that you guys sent. So if you can send those to us, I would appreciate that, so that we can look at that in a little. My memory just couldn't deal with both things at the same time. So
Totally.
and track that.
Thank you for being here.
Thanks.
And I completely understand how challenging it is right now to be a working parent when you have a sick baby at home. So thank you for being here. And
I don't know if mine is, I don't even, mine's 13. So I don't know if that's better than worse.
It counts.
A sick baby, but
all of it.
Thank you.
Yes, and we will absolutely follow up with the more robust build out of what we had put out, but then what you all have provided for information. So yes, thank you.
Yeah.
I'm Julie Krulitz from Bbf. I could give a little update. I feel like I don't have information about all the different projects that relate to early childhood, particularly the prenatal piece. Those aren't projects that I'm really involved in. But one of the things we've recently taken over the continuous quality improvement work with the Dulce practices. So those are primary care practices with family health specialists who help families with understanding their babies and providing resources. And the Center for the Center for Study of Social Policy has recently helped them come up with a new data collection system. So we really get consistent data across all the sites. So we're really excited to start to dig into that and understand more about the available resources and how we can use that data to help the state.
Thank you, Julie. Morgan, I wonder if you want to jump in and just give a few of the BBF updates.
Sure, thank you. And then I have to go hop off and tell all of our national partners about the amazing work our data teams are doing. So the first thing that I want to make sure everyone knows about is Vermont's childcare and early childhood education systems analysis. We're calling it the early childhood systems analysis, so people don't have to say that every time, but we have hired a national contractor to come in and examine our systems, specifically thinking about governance, administration, capacity, data, and all things related to how we best support kids and families in the state of Vermont. So we are really excited to have Elliot Regenstein and Nasha Patel. They are from Watershed Advisors and Foresight Law and Policy as our national contractor supporting this work. They are in the process of just starting to reach out to conduct key informant interviews or to schedule key informant interviews, and will also be hosting a series of focus groups with partners to discuss some of the most controversial and challenging topics that we haven't been able to land the plane on in the state of Vermont. So really excited to have brought this group of partners together so that they can come to data and evaluation and talk about Vermont's early childhood data infrastructure and what we need. So really excited about that body of work. The second is that the State Advisory Council on an annual basis makes a series of recommendations. And this year there is a very concrete hardcore set of data specific recommendations that were collaboratively developed by folks who previously sat on the data and evaluation committee, but also some of our agency partners who weren't traditionally at that table. So Dora just posted a link to the current draft of those recommendations. It is going to a vote at the State Advisory Council meeting on Monday. And then the bigger question, once they're voted on and published in our annual publication, the State of Vermont's Children and Families, is what do we do with those recommendations and how do we move the work forward? And this committee specifically is already tackling some of the things that we have just decided needed to be talked about in terms of SAC Recs. So please take a look at those, interested in hearing feedback. And then finally, the State of Vermont's Young Children, which we formerly called How Are Vermont's Young Children, is our annual publication where Building Bright Futures puts together a pretty large snapshot of all of the most up-to-date high-quality data across sectors to present to our legislative partners, to the governor's team, to the administration, but also to all early childhood stakeholders and anyone who cares about kids and families, so that they have in one quick snapshot a point in time, this is what you need to know across all of these different sectors. And what's really exciting, and Aaron, this maps well to what Let's Grow Kids is really focusing on, is that the spotlight, the 2-page spotlight for this year's report is on the workforce crisis in the early childhood system. So we have reached out, and I'm now publicly asking this of anyone on this call as well. We've reached out to partners and said, what are the indicators that you have within your sector, within your topic area, within your area of expertise that would tell us what's happening with workforce? For childcare, for early childhood educators, for mental health clinicians, for designated agencies, you name it. In the early childhood system, what would give us a very quick snapshot to talk about the workforce crisis that we're facing in the early childhood system? We're compiling and building that narrative, and then it will be published in that spotlight. And I agree, this is just the start of that conversation. There will likely need to be series of data briefs coming out, not just from this committee, but from our partners on the workforce crisis over time. And it could be an awesome topic for early childhood grand rounds. I am going to have to jump off now. So I just wanted to say it's really awesome to see all of you awesome people and data nerds. I love this committee already, and I'm really excited about the work that's going forward. So thank you for being here, and I'll turn it back over to Dora.
Thanks, Morgan. And thank you to those of you who have sent data for that State of Vermont's children, and also for that workforce spotlight. If you have other things to send, please don't hesitate. Again, you can just respond to that email, or many of you already have my email. Before we jump off, I wonder, Kate, is there anything from you or your team? Any updates? Sorry to put you on the spot.
No, that's okay. I think Wendy shared a little bit, but I wanted to let everybody know that for the suspension and expulsion data collection, that is typically an annual collection. We have switched at the agency to collect real-time data from any public or private pre-K programs that have suspended or expelled children. So we anticipate to start gathering that data over this next school year. And that will, of course, align with the annual data collection that school districts provide us, that Wendy's team actually gathers. So just that one. My team, Wendy, Leslie, Michelle, can you think of anything else?
That's wonderful, and thank you, especially having us put you on the spot. Any other updates? I will follow up with an email tomorrow with this recording to the larger group. Again, feel free to send any feedback about the data priorities, subcommittees, and looking for nominations for public and private co-chairs. And we hope to see you again in another couple of months. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you so much.